When I stepped into that taxi at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night in Manhattan, exhausted from a 14-hour day of negotiations that had finally closed a $47 million merger, I had no idea that the next 2 hours would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. The driver was a man in his early 40s with intense dark eyes that kept finding mine in the rearview mirror. There was something unsettling about the way he watched me, but I was too tired to care. I just wanted to get home to Greenwich, pour myself a glass of the Chateau Margaux that Richard and I had been saving, and fall into bed. Greenwich, Connecticut, I told him, giving him my address. He nodded without saying anything, which suited me fine. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. We merged onto the highway, and I closed my eyes, letting my head rest against the cool window. The merger had been brutal. 3 months of due diligence, 2 weeks of intense negotiations, and finally today, signatures on the dotted line. My boutique financial consulting firm had just earned a $2 million fee, and I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. The truth was, I'd been feeling hollow for 6 months now, ever since I noticed Sebastian pulling away from me in ways I couldn't understand. My son had always been somewhat distant, even as a child. I'd attributed it to my own failings as a mother, too focused on building my career in those early years, too determined to prove myself in a male-dominated industry. But lately, the distance had grown into something else, something that felt almost like hostility. At Sunday dinners, he barely looked at me. When I asked about work, his answers were clipped and cold. Penelope, his wife, had stopped bringing little Harper over for our Thursday afternoon visits. And when I asked why, Sebastian simply said they were busy. I opened my eyes when I realized we'd been driving for almost 40 minutes, and nothing outside the window looked familiar. We should have been approaching Greenwich by now. Instead, we were still in New York, and the neighborhood's getting progressively less upscale. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice taking on the firm but polite tone I used in board meetings. "I think you may have missed the exit." The driver didn't respond. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and I noticed for the first time that they were trembling. A cold feeling started in my stomach and spread through my chest. This was wrong. Something was very wrong. "Excuse me," I said again, louder this time. "You've gone the wrong way. We need to turn around." He still didn't respond, but I saw his eyes in the mirror again, and this time there was something in them that looked almost like anguish. My hand moved instinctively to my purse, feeling for my phone. I was already mentally composing what I'd say to 911 when the driver suddenly pulled over to the curb in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. Dark streets, poorly lit, buildings that looked like they'd seen better decades. He turned around in his seat to face me, and that's when I saw how badly his hands were shaking. Not just trembling, actually shaking, like he had some kind of medical condition. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Ma'am, please, please don't get out of this car." The fear that had been building in my chest exploded into full panic. "Don't get out? He brings me to some unknown neighborhood in Queens and tells me not to get out?" Every news story I'd ever heard about women being kidnapped, assaulted, worse, they all flooded my mind at once. My hand was on the door handle. My other hand was digging in my purse for my phone. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out, to run, to get away from this man, and this car, and this dark street. "Please," he said again, and now I could see there were tears in his eyes. "Please, Mrs. Thornberry, I'm begging you. Don't get out here. It's not safe." The fact that he knew my name only made it worse. This wasn't random. This was planned. Someone had sent this man to what? Kidnap me? Kill me? My mind couldn't even process the possibilities. "Let me out of this car right now," I said, and I was proud that my voice didn't shake, even though my entire body was trembling. "Let me out, or I'm calling the police." "I am the police," he said quietly. Well, I was. NYPD for 12 years. Detective Damian Volkov, ma'am. I left the force 3 years ago. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Ex-cop could mean anything. Could mean dirty cop. Could mean cop who got kicked out for doing something terrible. "I don't care who you are," I said. "Let me out of this car now." "I can't do that, ma'am. Not here. Not on this street. Because if you get out here and knock on that door right there," he pointed to a modest apartment building across the street, You're going to meet someone who will destroy what's left of your relationship with your son, and I can't let that happen." The words hit me like a physical blow. My son? What did Sebastian have to do with this? "What are you talking about?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. Damien Volkov ran a shaking hand through his hair. "Mrs. Thornberry, I was hired 2 months ago by your son Sebastian. He paid me $25,000 up front with the promise of another 25 when the job is done. He told me you were in danger and that I needed to follow you, watch you, protect you from something you didn't know about." The panic in my chest shifted into something else. Confusion, hurt, betrayal. "Sebastian hired you to follow me?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been following you for 8 weeks. Every Thursday when you go to Woodlawn Cemetery. Every Sunday when your family comes for dinner and you can barely look at Sebastian without crying when you think no one's watching. Every Tuesday when you have lunch with your daughter Ophelia and spend the whole time asking if Sebastian has said anything about you." Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't even try to stop them. My son had hired someone to spy on me, to follow me, to watch my most private moments of grief at Michael's grave. "Why?" I managed to ask. Damien's hands were shaking so badly now that he clasped them together to still them. "Because about 3 months ago, Sebastian found some documents in his father's old files, financial records, payments made monthly to a woman named Claudia Moretti for the past 32 years. Payments that increased from $3,500 to $8,000 in the 6 months before your husband died." I felt like I couldn't breathe. Claudia. Oh God, Claudia. "Sebastian did some digging," Damien continued. "He found out that Claudia Moretti worked as your husband's executive secretary 33 years ago, that she quit suddenly when she was pregnant, that she gave birth to a baby boy 9 months later. A baby boy born on the exact same day that Sebastian's birth certificate says he was born." "Stop," I whispered. "Please stop." But Damien didn't stop. "He figured it out, Mrs. Thornberry. He knows that Claudia Moretti is his biological mother. He knows you're not. And for the past 3 months, he's been coming to this street 3 times a week, sitting in his car right where we're sitting now, staring at that apartment building where Claudia lives, trying to work up the courage to knock on her door." The tears were coming so hard now that I could barely see. 32 years. 32 years of trying to be a mother to a child who wasn't mine biologically, but who I'd raised as my own. 32 years of feeling a wall between us that I could never quite break through. 32 years of guilt. Guilt over not being able to love him the way I instantly loved Ophelia. Guilt over seeing Richard's betrayal every time I looked at Sebastian's face. Guilt over the loss of Michael that I'd never fully processed. And now Sebastian knew. He knew the truth that Richard and I had promised we'd take to our graves. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked when I could finally speak again. "Why tell me this?" Damien looked at me with those anguished eyes. "Because Sebastian hired me to protect you, but I realized about 3 weeks ago that he's not trying to protect you from some outside threat. He's trying to protect you from the truth. He's been investigating you, Mrs. Thornberry. He's had me take photos of you at the cemetery. He's pulled financial records. He's building some kind of case, and I don't know what he plans to do with it. But I know it's going to hurt you. And I know it's going to hurt him. And I can't—" his voice broke. "I can't keep taking his money and watching this family destroy itself over secrets that should have been told years ago." "Then why did you take the money?" I asked, and there was more bitterness in my voice than I intended. His hands started shaking again, worse than before. "Because my daughter Emma is 9 years old and she has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. We've tried everything covered by insurance. Nothing worked. There's an experimental treatment at Memorial Sloan Kettering that's showing real promise, but each cycle costs $45,000, and insurance won't touch it. When Sebastian approached me 2 months ago and offered me $50,000 to watch his mother for a few months, I didn't ask questions. I just took the money and paid for Emma's first treatment cycle. The anger I'd been building drained away instantly. A sick child, a desperate father. My son, manipulating this man's desperation to spy on his own mother. "How is she?" I asked quietly. "Your daughter." "The first cycle worked," he said, and fresh tears filled his eyes. "Her white blood cell count is improving, but she needs at least 3 more cycles, maybe 4. That's another $180,000. Money I don't have. Money Sebastian hasn't paid me yet, because the job isn't done. We sat there in silence for a long moment, this stranger and I, both of us trapped by circumstances we never could have anticipated, both of us hurting in ways that had nothing to do with each other, but had somehow become entangled. Finally, I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. What does Sebastian want you to do? Damien reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. He wants me to document everything. Your weekly visits to a grave for a child he never knew existed. Your financial records showing that you personally paid off $2 million of your husband's gambling debts that the family doesn't know about. Evidence that you've been lying to him his entire life about who his mother is. He says he needs proof before he confronts you. Proof that you're the person he's always suspected you were. Cold, calculating, dishonest. He handed me the folder, and I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were dozens of photos. Me kneeling at Michael's grave. Me crying in my car afterward. Me looking at Sebastian during Sunday dinners with an expression of such profound sadness that I didn't even recognize myself. Bank statements showing the $2 million payment to Richard's creditors, and copies of the monthly payments to Claudia, going back 32 years. He doesn't understand, I whispered, staring at the evidence of my entire life laid bare. He doesn't understand any of it. Then help him understand, Damien said. Because right now, he thinks you're a liar who stole his life. He thinks you kept him from his real mother out of spite or pride or control. He doesn't know about Michael. He doesn't know that his father was the one who begged you to take him in. He doesn't know that you've been visiting his brother's grave every week for 30 years because you've never forgiven yourself for not being able to love him the way you loved the son you lost. How do you know all this? I asked. Because I'm a detective, ma'am. It's what I do. I don't just take photos and follow people. I investigate. I put pieces together. And once I started digging into your family's history, I realized that this story isn't about a cold mother who lied to her son. It's about a woman who lost a child and tried to love another child in his place, even though her heart was broken. It's about a man who made a terrible mistake and tried to fix it in the only way he knew how. And it's about a son who doesn't have all the facts and is about to make a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life. I closed the folder and looked at the apartment building across the street. Is she there right now? Claudia? Yes, ma'am. Second floor, apartment 2C. She gets home from her shift at Macy's around 9:30 every night. She's been there for about 30 minutes now. Does she know? Does she know Sebastian has been watching her? I don't think so. She keeps to herself, works her shifts, comes home, doesn't seem to have much of a social life. From what I can tell, she's been alone for 32 years. The guilt that had been my constant companion for 3 decades intensified until I thought it might crush me. Claudia, alone for 32 years, watching her son grow up from a distance, never able to claim him, never able to hold him. And all because Richard and I had decided it was better this way. What happens now? I asked. Damien looked at me with those sad, understanding eyes. That's up to you, Mrs. Thornberry. I can drive you home right now, and we can pretend this conversation never happened. Sebastian will eventually get up the courage to knock on Claudia's door. You'll find out when he confronts you with whatever she tells him. Your family will explode, and everyone will suffer because no one was brave enough to tell the truth when it mattered. He paused, his shaking hands gripping the steering wheel again. Or, he continued, you can do what I think you've wanted to do for 32 years. You can knock on that door yourself. You can talk to Claudia. You can tell her everything about Michael, about why you agreed to raise Sebastian, about the love you tried so hard to give him even when your heart was broken. And then maybe, just maybe, the 3 of you can figure out how to tell Sebastian the truth together. Not as enemies, not as rivals, but as 3 people who all love the same man and want what's best for him. I looked at that apartment building for a long time. Second floor, apartment 2C, where the woman who gave birth to my son lived alone, probably thinking about him every single day. Where the truth I'd been running from for 3 decades was waiting behind a door I'd been too afraid to knock on. How much do you need? I finally asked. For your daughter's treatment. Damien looked confused. Ma'am? How much money do you need for Emma's treatment? All of it. Not just the next cycle, all of them. Mrs. Thornberry, I wasn't trying to... I know you weren't, but I'm asking anyway. How much? He was quiet for a moment. With all 4 cycles and associated costs, probably around $200,000 total. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Give me your account information. Mrs. Thornberry, I can't accept. Yes, you can. Because I'm going to need your help with something. And I'm going to need to know that you're helping me because it's the right thing to do, not because you're desperate for Sebastian's money. Give me your account information, Damien. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and read me his account number. I transferred $250,000, enough for all of Emma's treatment, and then some. Now, I said, opening the car door, you're going to come with me. We're going to knock on Claudia Moretti's door, and we're going to start fixing this family before it breaks beyond repair. Standing on that sidewalk in Queens, staring at the door that would change everything, I felt 32 years of memories crash over me like a wave. I needed Damien to understand, needed someone to understand, why this moment was so much more complicated than it looked from the outside. Before we go up there, I said, my voice barely steady, I need to tell you something. I need someone to know the whole story, not just the pieces Sebastian found in his father's files. Damien nodded, and we sat down on a bench across from Claudia's building. The November air was cold, but I barely felt it. I was back in a hospital room in 1991, holding my son Michael in my arms as he took his last breath. I was 23 when I got pregnant with Michael, I began. Richard and I had been married for 2 years. We were so excited. I'd just started working as a junior analyst at Merrill Lynch, and Richard was a new associate at his law firm. We had plans, big plans. I was going to take 3 months of maternity leave, then come back and conquer Wall Street. Richard was going to make partner before he turned 35. We were going to have it all. I stopped, the memory of that optimism so painful I could barely breathe. I worked until I was 8 months pregnant. I was in the middle of a presentation to a major client when my water broke. They rushed me to Mount Sinai, and everything seemed fine at first. The labor was long, but normal. And then, my voice cracked, and then they couldn't find the heartbeat. Damien didn't say anything. He just listened, and somehow that made it easier to continue. They did an emergency C-section. Michael was born at 7 months, and he was perfect, absolutely perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, Richard's nose, my eyes. But his lungs weren't developed enough. They put him in the NICU, hooked him up to machines, told us to pray. We prayed for 3 weeks. Every day, I sat by his incubator and told him about the life we were going to have. I told him about the room we'd prepared for him, with the blue walls and the mobile, with the little airplanes. I told him about his grandfather, who was so excited to teach him to sail. I told him everything. The tears were falling freely now, but I didn't wipe them away. On December 3rd, his lungs just gave out. I was holding him when he died. Richard was at work. He'd gone in for just a few hours to handle an emergency with a client. Michael died while I was alone with him, and I remember thinking that this was my punishment. Punishment for being the kind of woman who worked until 8 months pregnant. Punishment for putting my career before my baby. Punishment for thinking I could have it all. That's not how it works, Damien said softly. You know that, right? Intellectually, yes. But emotionally? I blamed myself for 2 years. I fell into a depression so deep that some days I couldn't get out of bed. Richard tried to help, but he was grieving too, and he didn't know what to do with a wife who couldn't stop crying. My career stalled. I took a leave of absence that turned into 6 months, then 9 months, then a year. When I finally went back to work, I'd lost all the momentum I'd built. The clients I'd cultivated had moved on to other analysts. The projects I'd been leading had been reassigned. I had to start over from scratch. I looked up at Claudia's window. Richard started working longer hours. At first I thought he was just trying to escape the sadness at home. But then I found out about Claudia, his executive secretary, 24 years old, beautiful, uncomplicated. She didn't cry every time she saw a baby. She didn't spend hours sitting in the nursery we'd prepared for Michael, surrounded by clothes he'd never wear. She was easy, and I was hard, and Richard made a choice. When did you find out? Damien asked. March of 1993, 15 months after Michael died. Richard came home one night and just told me. He said Claudia was pregnant. He said he was sorry, that it had been a mistake, that he loved me and wanted to save our marriage. He begged me not to leave him. I laughed bitterly at the memory. You want to know the worst part? I was so deep in my depression that my first thought wasn't anger or betrayal. It was envy. This woman was having the baby that I couldn't have. This woman was going to be a mother, and I was just the empty shell of a woman who'd held her dead son and never recovered. "What did you do?" Damien asked. I told him to get out. I told him I wanted a divorce. He left, and I sat in that empty house for 3 days, not eating, barely sleeping, just existing. And then, on the 4th day, Richard came back. He had a baby with him, Sebastian, 1 year old, with these big brown eyes and the most serious expression I'd ever seen on a baby. Richard put him in my arms and said, "Claudia signed away her parental rights. She took a settlement and agreed to disappear. This is our son now. This is our second chance." I looked at Damien. I should have said no. I should have told Richard he couldn't just buy a baby to fix our broken marriage. But when I looked at Sebastian, I saw Michael. I saw the chance to be a mother again. I saw redemption for all the guilt I'd been carrying. So I said yes. I agreed to raise Claudia's baby as my own. We fabricated adoption papers, changed the birth certificate, moved to Connecticut to start fresh where no one knew us. And I tried. God knows I tried to love Sebastian the way a mother should. "But you couldn't," Damien said, and there was no judgment in his voice. "I could, but not the way I should have. Every time I looked at Sebastian, I saw 2 things, the son I'd lost and the betrayal that brought this new son into my life. When he cried in the middle of the night, I fed him and changed him and held him. But part of me was thinking about Michael. When he took his first steps, I clapped and celebrated. But part of me was remembering that Michael never got to take any steps. When he started preschool, I dressed him in the little outfits I'd bought and took pictures. But part of me was looking at the blue room with the airplane mobile that I'd finally packed away. I wiped my eyes. And then, when Sebastian was 3 years old, I got pregnant again. Ophelia. And the moment she was born, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Michael died. Pure, uncomplicated love. No guilt, no grief, no betrayal. Just love. And that's when I realized how different my feelings were for Sebastian. How much harder I had to work to feel for him what came so naturally with Ophelia. "Did Sebastian notice?" Damien asked. "Children always notice. He never said anything, but I could see it in his eyes. The way he'd try so hard to please me. The way he'd bring me drawings from school and wait for my reaction with such hope in his face. The way he'd ask, 'Mommy, do you love me?' And I'd say yes. And he'd ask again, 'But do you love me as much as Ophelia?' And I'd lie and say yes, absolutely, the same. But children know when you're lying." I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting. By the time Sebastian was 10, the distance between us had become a canyon. He stopped trying to win my affection. He focused all his energy on pleasing Richard instead. He became this perfect son. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect everything. He went to Yale, then Harvard Business School, then landed a job at one of the top private equity firms in the country. He married Penelope, who came from exactly the right kind of family. He gave us a granddaughter. He did everything right. But he always felt like he wasn't enough, Damien said. Yes, and the terrible thing is, it wasn't because he wasn't enough. It was because I wasn't enough. I wasn't enough of a mother to move past my grief and love him without reservations. I wasn't enough of a wife to work through Richard's betrayal instead of letting it poison my relationship with an innocent child. I wasn't enough of a human being to separate the baby from the circumstances that brought him into my life. I looked up at Claudia's window again. Richard paid her $3,500 a month for 32 years. I didn't know he'd increased it to $8,000 in his last 6 months, but knowing Richard, he probably knew he was dying. He had a heart condition, genetic. His father died of the same thing at 64. Richard started having symptoms around his 60th birthday. Chest pains, shortness of breath. He saw specialists, but they told him what he already knew. His heart was giving out, and there was nothing they could do except manage the symptoms and hope he had a few more years. Did you know? Damien asked. About the heart condition? Yes. About him increasing Claudia's payments? No. Richard kept that from me. He kept a lot of things from me toward the end, including the gambling debts. $2 million he lost over 5 years, trying to feel something, I think. trying to recapture some excitement in a life that had become one long exercise in managing consequences of old mistakes. I pulled my coat tighter around me. When Richard died 3 years ago, massive heart attack in his office, exactly like his father, I was devastated. Despite everything, I loved him. He was my husband for 35 years. We'd built a life together, raised 2 children, survived tragedies that would have destroyed other marriages. And then, 2 weeks after his funeral, I found out about the debts. $2 million owed to various casinos in Atlantic City. Richard had taken out secret loans against our house to cover some of it, but there was still so much outstanding. That's when you paid it off yourself, Damien said. Yes, I used money from my own business. Money I'd spent 25 years building after I finally climbed out of my depression and rebuilt my career. I paid every penny, and I never told Sebastian or Ophelia. I couldn't bear for them to know that their father, who they idolized, had been that reckless, that he'd risked everything we'd built on the turn of a card or the roll of dice. I turned to face Damien fully. So now you know the whole story. I'm not the cold, calculating woman Sebastian thinks I am. I'm just broken. I've been broken since the day I held my firstborn son while he died in my arms. And every decision I've made since then, agreeing to raise Sebastian, keeping Claudia's payments a secret, hiding Richard's debts, visiting Michael's grave every Thursday for 30 years, all of it comes from that brokenness. I didn't know how to fix myself, so I tried to fix everything else instead. And in the process, I broke my relationship with the son who needed me most. Damien stood up beside me. So let's start fixing it now. Let's go talk to Claudia. I looked at that door one more time. 2nd floor, apartment 2C, where the woman who'd given birth to my son had lived alone for 32 years, probably loving him from a distance in ways I'd never been brave enough to ask about. I'm ready, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. But ready or not, it was time to face the truth. All of it. Together. The stairs to Claudia's apartment creaked under our feet, and each step felt like walking toward an execution. My execution. The death of every careful lie I'd maintained for 3 decades. Damien stayed slightly behind me, a quiet presence that somehow made this impossible task feel slightly less impossible. When we reached apartment 2C, I stood frozen in front of the door for what felt like an eternity. My hand was raised to knock, but I couldn't make myself do it. What would I even say? Hello? I'm the woman who's been raising your son for 32 years while you lived 20 miles away and never got to see him grow up? Mrs. Thornberry, Damien said softly behind me. She deserves to know the truth as much as Sebastian does. He was right. I knocked. The door opened after a moment, and I found myself face to face with Claudia Moretti for the first time in 33 years. She'd aged, of course, we all had, but she was still beautiful in a quiet, understated way. Gray hair cut in a simple bob, brown eyes that were kind but tired, wearing jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. She looked at me with polite confusion that quickly shifted to recognition, then shock. "Delphine," she whispered, and hearing her say my name after all these years made something break inside my chest. "Hello, Claudia. May we come in? We need to talk about Sebastian." Her face went pale. Is something wrong? Is he hurt?" The immediate maternal concern in her voice was a knife to my heart. She'd given him up 32 years ago, and her first instinct was still to worry about his safety. "He's fine. Physically, he's fine. But he knows, Claudia. He found out about the payments. He knows you're his biological mother." Claudia grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Damien moved forward, ready to catch her if she fell, but she managed to stay upright. "Come in," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please come in." The apartment was small, but immaculately clean. 1 bedroom from what I could see. A living room with a worn sofa and a bookshelf filled with paperbacks. And on the walls, oh God, on the walls, were framed newspaper clippings. I moved closer to look at them, and my vision blurred with tears. Every single one was about Sebastian. His graduation from Greenwich High School as valedictorian, his acceptance to Yale, his wedding announcement in the New York Times, a business journal article about his promotion to senior vice president, even a small mention in Forbes about a deal he'd closed last year. "I've followed his entire life," Claudia said quietly behind me. I know I gave up the right to be in it, but I couldn't give up the right to know about it. Is that pathetic? No, I said, and I meant it. It's love. Complicated, painful love, but love nonetheless. We sat down on her sofa, Claudia and I on opposite ends, Damien in a chair across from us. For a long moment, no one spoke. We just sat there, three people connected by a man who wasn't present, trying to figure out how to navigate impossible terrain. Finally, Claudia spoke. How did he find out? He was going through Richard's files for tax purposes, I explained. He found records of the monthly payments. He did some investigating and pieced it together. Does he hate me? Claudia asked, and the vulnerability in her voice made her seem much younger than 56. I don't know what he feels about you, I said honestly, but I know he's angry at me. He's been pulling away for months. He hired Damien here to follow me, to document my life, to build some kind of case against me before confronting me with what he knows. Claudia looked at Damien with surprise. You're working for Sebastian? I was, Damien said. I'm not anymore. Mrs. Thornberry and I came to an arrangement. Now I'm here because I think all three of you need to have an honest conversation before this family destroys itself over secrets and misunderstandings. 3 of us? Claudia asked, confused. You, me, and Sebastian, I clarified. I want to tell him the truth, all of it. But I think he needs to hear it from both of us, not just me. He needs to understand why you gave him up, why I agreed to raise him, and why neither of us has ever told him the truth. Claudia's eyes filled with tears. I can't face him. I gave up that right 32 years ago. You gave up legal rights, I said. You didn't give up being his mother, not biologically, not emotionally, based on what I see on these walls. And he deserves to know his story from the person who started it, not just the person who continued it. Why are you doing this? Claudia asked, and there was something almost like suspicion in her voice. Why now, after all these years? Why bring me into this? It was a fair question. I took a deep breath and decided to give her the truth she deserved. Because I've spent 32 years trying to be your replacement, and I failed. I failed Sebastian in ways that I'm only now beginning to understand. He grew up feeling like he wasn't enough for me, like there was something fundamentally wrong with him that made him less lovable than his sister. And he was right. Not because there was anything wrong with him, but because there was something wrong with me. I wiped my eyes. Before Sebastian came into my life, I had a son, Michael. He died at 7 months old, and I never recovered. When Richard brought Sebastian to me, I thought I was getting a second chance at motherhood. But instead, I just transferred all my grief and guilt onto an innocent baby who had nothing to do with any of it. Every time I looked at Sebastian, I saw Michael. And every time I saw Michael, I remembered that I'd failed him, that I'd worked too hard during my pregnancy, that I'd somehow caused his premature birth, that I'd let him die while his father was at work and I was alone. Claudia was crying now, too. You didn't fail Michael. You didn't cause his death. Babies die sometimes, and it's not the mother's fault. I know that now, but I didn't know it then. And by the time I figured it out, the damage to Sebastian was done. He spent his childhood trying to earn love from a mother who couldn't give it freely because she was too busy grieving the son she'd lost. And that's not fair to him. He deserves better. He deserves to know that there are 2 women in this world who love him. One who gave birth to him and one who raised him. And that both of us failed him in our own ways, but both of us are willing to try to make it right. Claudia looked at the newspaper clippings on her wall. I was 24 when I got pregnant. I'd been working for Richard for 6 months. He was brilliant and charismatic and everything I thought a man should be. When he started staying late at the office, when he started confiding in me about his problems at home, I felt special, chosen. I knew he was married, but his wife was depressed and distant, and I convinced myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong, that I was just being there for someone who needed me. She laughed bitterly. And then I got pregnant. Suddenly Richard wasn't so brilliant and charismatic anymore. He was terrified. He said his wife had just lost a baby and was barely holding on, and if she found out about us, it would destroy her completely. He offered me money to get an abortion. A lot of money. $50,000. I hadn't known that detail. It was another secret Richard had kept. I thought about it, Claudia continued. I thought about taking the money and making the whole problem disappear, but when I went to the clinic, I couldn't do it. I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, and then I left. I told Richard I was keeping the baby. He panicked. He said I'd ruin his career, ruin his marriage, ruin everything. But I didn't care. I thought I could do it alone. What changed? I asked. Poverty changed, Claudia said simply. I was living in a studio apartment in Queens, working retail after I quit Richard's office, trying to afford prenatal care on minimum wage. When Sebastian was born, the hospital bills alone were $18,000. I had no insurance, no savings, no family to help. I was drowning. And then Richard showed up with his offer. $3,500 a month for the rest of my life if I gave up my parental rights and disappeared. $3,500 a month was more than I made in 3 months of retail work. She looked at me with such raw pain that I could barely stand it. I held Sebastian for 2 days in the hospital. 2 days of memorizing his face, his smell, the little sounds he made when he slept. And then Richard came and took him. And I signed papers that said I was never his mother, that legally he belonged to someone else. To you. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry that you had to make that choice. I'm sorry that Richard put you in that position. I'm sorry that I benefited from your pain. Did you? Claudia asked. Benefit from it? Because from what you're telling me, raising Sebastian didn't bring you happiness. It brought you more pain. So maybe we both lost. Maybe the only person who really benefited was Richard, because he got to keep his perfect life intact while we both suffered in our own ways. She was right. Richard had orchestrated everything to protect himself, and Claudia and I had both paid the price. And now Sebastian was paying the price for all of us. He's been sitting outside this building, I told Claudia. Damien says he comes here 3 times a week and just sits in his car, staring at your window. He's trying to work up the courage to knock on your door. Claudia put her hand over her mouth. He's been here? Outside? For 2 months, Damien confirmed. Always between 9 and 10 at night. He parks across the street and watches your window for about an hour, and then he drives away. Why hasn't he knocked? Claudia asked. Because he's afraid, I said. He's angry at me for lying to him, but he's also afraid of what it means if everything he thought he knew about his life is wrong. He's afraid of meeting you and feeling something, or worse, feeling nothing. He's afraid that if he opens this door, his entire identity will fall apart. Claudia stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where Sebastian had apparently been parking for weeks. What if he doesn't want to know me? What if he knocks on that door just to tell me he hates me for giving him up? Then we deal with that, I said. But at least it will be honest. At least he'll know the truth instead of whatever story he's constructed in his head based on incomplete information. What story has he constructed? Claudia asked. I thought about the folder Damien had shown me in the car. The photographs, the bank statements, the carefully documented evidence of my Thursday visits to Michael's grave. He thinks I'm a cold, manipulative liar who stole his life and kept him from his real mother out of spite or pride, I said. He thinks the weekly cemetery visits are to Richard's grave, and that I'm this devoted widow mourning the husband I loved. He doesn't know about Michael. He doesn't know that I'm not mourning Richard. I'm apologizing to the son I lost for not being able to love his replacement the way I should have. So tell him, Claudia said, turning from the window. Tell him about Michael. Tell him about the depression. Tell him why you couldn't love him the way you wanted to. Give him context instead of just guilt. I will, I said. But I need you to tell him your side too. He needs to understand that you didn't abandon him because you didn't want him. You gave him up because you loved him enough to want him to have a better life than you could provide. He needs to hear that from you. Claudia was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, When? Tomorrow, I said, making the decision even as the words left my mouth. Tomorrow night, Sunday dinner. Sebastian comes to my house every Sunday at 6 with Penelope and Harper. Tomorrow you'll be there too, and Ophelia, and Damien, as a witness and support. And we'll all sit down together and tell Sebastian everything. No more secrets, no more lies, just the truth, however painful it is. He'll be furious, Claudia said. Yes, I agreed. He will, but he's already furious. At least this way, his fury will be directed at the real story, not the story he's imagined. Damien spoke up. Mrs. Thornbury, are you sure you want to do this in front of his wife and daughter? This is going to be intense, maybe traumatic. Having Harper there might not be. Harper needs to be there, I interrupted. Because one day she'll ask her father why he doesn't talk to his grandmother anymore, or why there are two women in her life who both claim some connection to her daddy. And I want her to see that families can survive truth. That honesty, however painful, is better than the alternative. She's 2 years old. She won't understand the words, but she'll understand the emotions. She'll see her father cry, and she'll see him being held by people who love him. That's the lesson I want her to learn. I turned to Claudia. Please. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know you've suffered because of decisions Richard and I made without consulting you. But I'm asking anyway. Please come tomorrow. Please help me give Sebastian the truth he deserves. Claudia looked at the newspaper clippings on her wall one more time. 32 years of loving her son from a distance. 32 years of wondering what kind of man he'd become. 32 years of seeing him in photographs, but never in person. Okay, she finally said. I'll come. What time? 6 o'clock. I'll text you my address. I pulled out my phone and we exchanged numbers. A surreal moment, adding the biological mother of my son to my contacts. As Damien and I prepared to leave, Claudia stopped me at the door. Delphine, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you love him? Sebastian, do you love him? Or have you just been going through the motions for 32 years? It was the question I'd been avoiding asking myself for 3 decades. The question that kept me awake at night. The question that sent me to Michael's grave every Thursday to beg forgiveness from a son who'd never lived long enough to judge me. I love him, I said. And I realized as I said it that it was true. Not the way I loved Michael, because Michael was pure potential. I never got to know who he would become. And not the way I love Ophelia, because that love came without complications or guilt. But I love Sebastian in a way that's entirely his own. I love his intelligence, his determination, his ridiculous perfectionism that I know comes from trying to earn my approval. I love how patient he is with Harper, how he reads to her every night, even when he's exhausted from work. I love how he holds Penelope's hand when they walk, like he's still amazed that she chose him. I love who he became despite my failures as a mother, not because of them. Tears were streaming down both our faces now. I just wish I'd told him that, I continued. I wish I'd told him 1,000 times instead of assuming he knew. I wish I'd hugged him more, laughed with him more, let him see me vulnerable instead of always being this controlled, distant figure who measured love in practical terms like college tuition and trust funds instead of the currency that actually matters, time and attention and honest emotion. Claudia pulled me into a hug, and we stood there in her doorway, 2 women who'd loved the same child in profoundly different ways, both of us crying for the years we couldn't get back and the pain we couldn't undo. Tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow we'll try to make it right. Tomorrow, I agreed. As Damien and I walked back to his car, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 decades. Not peace exactly, but something like hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, truth could heal what lies had broken. The hope that my son might understand, if not forgive. The hope that Claudia might get to be part of Sebastian's life in some small way. The hope that our family, strange and broken as it was, might survive this. Thank you, I said to Damien as he drove me back to Greenwich. Thank you for caring enough to bring me to her. Thank you for Emma's treatment, he said. I'll never be able to repay you for that. You already have, I said. You gave me the push I needed to stop running from the truth. That's worth more than money. When I got home to my empty house in Greenwich, the house where Sebastian had grown up, where Sunday dinners had been stiff and formal affairs for years, I sat in the living room and called Ophelia. Mom? She answered, confused. I never called this late. Is everything okay? No, I said honestly. Nothing is okay, but I'm trying to fix it. Can you come to dinner tomorrow? 6 o'clock. It's important. Of course. What's going on? I'll explain everything tomorrow. Just promise me you'll come, and that you'll try to keep an open mind about what you hear. You're scaring me, Mom. I'm scared too, sweetheart. But sometimes being scared means you're about to do something brave. I'll see you tomorrow. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about tomorrow night. Thinking about Sebastian's face when he walked in and saw Claudia sitting at our dinner table. Thinking about Ophelia's shock when she learned her brother wasn't fully her brother. Thinking about little Harper, playing on the floor while the adults around her dealt with revelations that would reshape their entire family structure. It was going to be awful. It was going to be painful. Someone, probably everyone, was going to say things they regretted. There would be tears and anger and accusations, but it would be true. And truth, I was learning, was the only foundation strong enough to rebuild what lies had destroyed. I just hoped we'd all survive the demolition. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp November weather that Richard used to love. Clear skies, golden light filtering through the trees, the smell of wood smoke from neighbors' fireplaces. I spent the entire day preparing dinner with shaking hands, dropping things, burning the first attempt at roasted vegetables, starting over. Everything had to be perfect, even though I knew perfection wouldn't matter once the truth came out. Ophelia arrived first at 5:30, letting herself in with her key like she'd been doing since she moved back after her divorce. She found me in the kitchen, staring at the dining room table I'd set for 7 people instead of the usual 5. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked, taking in my pale face and trembling hands. "You look terrible. Are you sick?" "Not sick," I said. "Just preparing to blow up our family." She grabbed my shoulders. "What are you talking about? You're not making any sense." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. My heart stopped. It was too early for Sebastian and his family. Which meant I opened the door to find Claudia standing on my front porch, wearing a navy dress that looked new, her gray hair styled carefully, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Behind her was Damien, who'd apparently picked her up as we'd arranged. "I almost didn't come," Claudia said, her voice shaking. "I turned around 3 times on the way here. Damien had to talk me out of getting out of the car at a red light and just running away." "I'm glad you didn't run," I said, though part of me wished we could both run. "Come in, please." Ophelia was staring at us from the kitchen doorway. "Mom, who is this?" "This is Claudia Moretti," I said, my voice barely steady. She's someone your brother needs to meet. Someone we all need to talk to. I'll explain everything once Sebastian gets here." "Sebastian?" Ophelia's voice rose. "This is about Sebastian? Mom, what the hell is going on?" The doorbell rang again. Through the frosted glass, I could see Sebastian's tall silhouette, Penelope beside him, the smaller shape of Harper between them. This was it. No more delays. No more running. I opened the door. Sebastian looked at me first with his usual guarded expression, the one he'd worn around me for months. Then his eyes moved past me to the living room, where Claudia stood frozen by the fireplace. I watched his face change. Confusion, then recognition, then shock, so profound he actually stumbled backward into Penelope. "What is she doing here?" His voice was barely a whisper, but the fury in it was unmistakable. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd been staring at her apartment for 2 months. "Come inside," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk. All of us." "No." Sebastian's face had gone white. "No, I'm not doing this. I'm not—" He turned to Penelope. "Take Harper to the car. Now." "Sebastian, what's wrong?" Penelope looked between her husband and the strange woman in my living room, completely confused. "Who is that?" "That's my mother," Sebastian said, and the word came out like an accusation. My real mother. The one Delphine has been hiding from me for 32 years. Ophelia gasped behind me. Penelope's hand flew to her mouth. Harper, sensing the tension, started to whimper. "Sebastian, please," I said. "Let me explain." "Let us explain. You deserve to know the whole story, not just the pieces you found." "The whole story?" Sebastian's laugh was bitter and broken. "You mean the story where you stole my life? Where you kept me from the woman who actually gave birth to me? Where you pretended to be my mother while treating me like I was never good enough, never worthy of the same love you gave Ophelia?" "That's not," I started, but he cut me off. "Don't," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Don't you dare tell me that's not how it was. I felt it every single day of my childhood. The difference, the distance, the way you looked at Ophelia like she hung the moon while you looked at me like I was a disappointing employee who never quite met your standards." Claudia stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Sebastian, please. Your mother, Delphine, she tried. She tried so hard to love you." "Oh, so you're defending her?" Sebastian turned his fury on Claudia. "The woman who raised your son while you what? Sat in your apartment in Queens collecting checks from my father? How much did it cost to buy you off? How much was I worth? Claudia flinched like he'd struck her. $3,500 a month, she said quietly. That's what I got paid to stay away from you. And I took it because I was 24 years old, working retail, drowning in hospital debt, and terrified of raising a baby alone. I took it because I thought you deserved better than what I could give you. I took it, and I've regretted it every single day for 32 years. You regretted it? Sebastian's voice broke. You regretted giving me up, but you never once tried to get me back? Never once knocked on our door? Never once fought for me? I signed papers, Claudia said, her voice barely audible. Legal papers that said I wasn't your mother anymore. Papers that said if I tried to contact you, I'd lose the money that was keeping me from being homeless. So no, I didn't fight. I accepted the choice I'd made, and I loved you from a distance, and I told myself it was enough because it had to be enough. Ophelia moved past me into the chaos. Wait, are you saying? She looked at me, then at Sebastian, then at Claudia. Are you saying Sebastian isn't your biological son, Mom? That you adopted him or something? Not adopted, I said, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. His father, our father, Richard, had an affair with Claudia. Sebastian is Richard's biological son and Claudia's. When Sebastian was 1 year old, Richard brought him home and asked me to raise him as my own. And I agreed. The silence that followed was deafening. Ophelia's face went through a dozen emotions: shock, confusion, hurt, anger, disbelief. You lied to us, she finally said. Both of you, Dad and you. You lied to us our entire lives. Yes, I said, because there was no point in denying it. We lied, and we were wrong, and I'm so sorry. But there's more to the story. There's context that Sebastian doesn't know, that none of you know. I don't want your context, Sebastian said. I don't want your excuses or your explanations or your... I had a son before you, I said, the words bursting out of me. His name was Michael, and he died when he was 7 months old. He died in my arms while your father was at work, and I blamed myself for 2 years. I fell into a depression so deep I couldn't function. And when Richard brought you home, I saw you as a replacement, as my second chance. But I couldn't love you the way I'd loved Michael, because every time I looked at you, I saw the son I'd lost and the betrayal that brought you into my life. So yes, I failed you. Yes, I was distant and cold and incapable of giving you the uncomplicated love you deserved. But it wasn't because of anything you did or didn't do. It was because I was broken, and I didn't know how to fix myself. Sebastian stared at me like he'd never seen me before. You had another son? Yes, you have a brother. Had a brother. He's buried at Woodlawn Cemetery. I visit him every Thursday. That's where I go. That's what Damien has been photographing for the last 2 months. Not Richard's grave, Michael's grave, where I go to apologize for failing him and for failing you. The anger drained from Sebastian's face, replaced by something that looked like devastation. He sank down onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. Penelope sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders, both of them trying to process information that was reshaping their entire understanding of our family. Little Harper, confused by all the adult emotions, started crying. Ophelia picked her up automatically, holding her niece close while staring at me with eyes that looked too much like Richard's. Why now? Ophelia asked. Why are you telling us this now? Because Sebastian hired Damien to investigate me, I said. Because he was building a case against me based on incomplete information. Because he was planning to confront me with accusations that weren't entirely true. And because I realized that the only way to save what's left of this family is to stop hiding. To stop protecting everyone from uncomfortable truths. To just be honest, however much it hurts. Sebastian looked up at me, his eyes red. There's a grave? Michael's grave? Yes. Can I see it? The question broke something inside me. After everything, after all the anger and accusations and pain, his first instinct was still to want to know about the brother he'd never met. Yes, I whispered. Of course you can see it. I'll take you there, whenever you want. He nodded slowly, then looked at Claudia, who was still standing by the fireplace, like she might disappear if she moved. I don't know what to call you, he said to her. You don't have to call me anything, Claudia said. I don't have the right to ask for a title. I just want you to know that giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. And not a day has gone by that I haven't wondered if you were happy, if you were healthy, if you were loved. I have every newspaper article about you framed on my walls. I know you graduated valedictorian from Greenwich High. I know you went to Yale and Harvard. I know you married Penelope 4 years ago. I know you have a daughter named Harper. I've watched your life from a distance, and I've been so proud of the man you became, even though I had nothing to do with it. Sebastian was crying now, silent tears running down his face. Why didn't you fight for me? Because I thought Delphine could give you a better life than I ever could, Claudia said simply. And I was probably right, but that doesn't mean it didn't kill me to let you go. We all stood there, or sat in Sebastian's case, in terrible, painful silence. A family fractured by secrets, held together by the thinnest threads of blood and history and love that had never been quite enough. Finally, Damien spoke from where he'd been standing quietly by the door. The food's probably getting cold. Maybe you should all go inside. Sit down. Talk this through like adults instead of wounded children. It was exactly what we needed to hear. We were all wounded children, really. Sebastian, who'd grown up feeling unloved. Ophelia, who was just now learning her family was built on lies. Claudia, who'd given up her child and never stopped grieving. And me, still mourning a son I'd lost 34 years ago and trying to make amends to the son I'd failed for 32. Okay, Sebastian said, standing up slowly. Okay, let's go inside. Let's try to figure this out. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to resolution. But it was a start. And sometimes, a start is all you get. We moved into the dining room like survivors of a shipwreck, each of us waterlogged with shock, barely able to navigate the simple act of sitting down at a table. I'd set 7 places, 1 for each of us, including Damien, who'd somehow become an essential witness to our family's unraveling. Harper sat in her high chair between Sebastian and Penelope, the only one of us who seemed unburdened by the weight of revelation, playing with crackers while the adults around her tried to figure out how to breathe. For a long moment, no one spoke. We just sat there, staring at plates of food that no one wanted to eat, listening to the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway that had belonged to Richard's father. That clock had witnessed every Sunday dinner for 15 years. It had seen Sebastian grow from a teenager to a man. It had marked time while we all pretended everything was fine, while secrets accumulated like dust in corners we never cleaned. Ophelia finally broke the silence. I need to understand the timeline. Mom, you said you had Michael before Sebastian. When? Michael was born in September of 1991, I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking under the table. He died in December of that same year. I fell into a depression that lasted almost 2 years. During that time, your father... I couldn't look at Sebastian as I said this. Your father had an affair with Claudia. She got pregnant in late 1992. Sebastian was born in September of 1993. When he was 1 year old, October of 1994, Richard brought him home and asked me to raise him as our son. And you just agreed? Ophelia's voice was sharp with disbelief. Your husband cheated on you, got another woman pregnant, and you just took in the baby like it was a stray cat he found? I was broken, I said simply. I'd lost Michael, and I thought I'd lost my chance at motherhood. When Richard put Sebastian in my arms, I saw redemption. I saw a second chance. I didn't think about Claudia's pain or what it would mean long term. I just thought about filling the emptiness inside me. Did it work? Sebastian asked quietly. Did I fill the emptiness? I looked at him directly for the first time since we'd sat down. No, because the emptiness wasn't about needing a baby. It was about grieving the specific baby I'd lost. You couldn't fill that void because you weren't meant to. You were your own person, not a replacement. But it took me years to understand that. And by the time I did, the damage was done. What damage? Sebastian's voice was controlled, but I could hear the hurt underneath it. The distance between us, I said. The way I could never quite connect with you, the way I connected with Ophelia. The way you always felt like you had to earn my love instead of just receiving it freely. That was my fault, Sebastian. Not yours. Never yours. Penelope spoke up, her voice careful. Mrs. Thornberry, I don't mean to be insensitive, but I need to understand something. You raised Sebastian for 32 years. You paid for his education. You helped us with the down payment on our house. You've been a grandmother to Harper. Are you saying you did all of that out of obligation? Out of guilt? No, I said firmly. I did it out of love. Complicated, imperfect love. But love nonetheless. The guilt was there, yes. But so was genuine affection. Pride in who Sebastian became. Joy in watching him succeed. I just couldn't express those feelings the way I should have. I couldn't break through the wall I'd built to protect myself from the grief of losing Michael. Sebastian pushed his plate away. I have a brother. Had a brother. Michael. What was he like? The question nearly undid me. In 34 years, no one had asked me that. Not even Richard. We'd buried Michael and buried the grief and never spoke of him again, as if silence could somehow make the pain less real. He was beautiful, I said, and my voice broke. He had your father's nose and my eyes, the same eyes you have, actually. He was born premature at 7 months, so he was tiny, just 5 pounds. The doctors put him in the NICU and hooked him up to all these machines. For 3 weeks, I sat by his incubator every single day and talked to him. I told him about the room we'd prepared for him, with blue walls and a mobile with little airplanes. I told him about his grandfather, who was so excited to teach him to sail. I told him about all the things we were going to do together. I wiped my eyes. On December 3rd, his lungs gave out. I was alone with him when he died. Your father was at work handling some emergency. I held Michael while he took his last breath, and I remember thinking that I'd been punished. Punished for being the kind of woman who worked until 8 months pregnant. Punished for putting my career before my baby. It wasn't rational, but grief isn't rational. Claudia was crying silently across the table. Ophelia was crying too, hearing for the first time about a brother she'd never known existed. Even Damien had tears in his eyes. Where is he buried? Sebastian asked. Woodlawn Cemetery, Section 14, Plot 82. There's a small headstone with his name and dates, and a little airplane carved into the stone because of the mobile I never got to hang in his room. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want to see it. After this, after dinner or whatever this is, I want to see where my brother is buried. Of course, I said. I'll take you. Ophelia turned to Claudia, who'd been sitting quietly, looking like she wished she could disappear into the wallpaper. And you gave birth to my brother and then just walked away? For money? Ophelia, I started, but Claudia held up her hand. No, it's okay. She deserves to be angry. Claudia looked at Ophelia directly. I was 24 years old, working retail for minimum wage, living in a studio apartment that cost more than I made in a month. When Sebastian was born, the hospital bills alone were $18,000. I had no insurance, no family, no way to pay. I was drowning in debt, and I had a newborn who needed things I couldn't afford. Diapers, formula, doctor's visits, it all costs money I didn't have. She took a shaky breath. Richard offered me $3,500 a month for life if I signed away my parental rights. That was more than I made in 3 months of work. It was security. It was the ability to pay my debts and not be homeless. And yes, it was also the easy way out. I could have fought. I could have applied for welfare, worked 3 jobs, scraped by. But I looked at Sebastian in his little hospital bassinet, and I thought about the life he could have with a mother who had money and education and opportunity, versus the life he'd have with me, struggling in poverty, exhausted all the time, unable to give him the things he deserved. So you sold him, Ophelia said flatly. Yes, Claudia said, and she didn't flinch from the accusation. I sold my rights to him, and I've lived with that decision every single day since. I've watched him from a distance, collected newspaper clippings, celebrated his successes alone in my apartment, and wondered if he was happy, wondered if he ever thought about me, wondered if he hated me for giving him up. Sebastian had been staring at his hands throughout this exchange. Now he looked up at Claudia. I don't hate you. I don't know what I feel about you, but I don't hate you. That's more than I deserve, Claudia said quietly. Did Richard ever talk to you about me? Sebastian asked. After he took me, did he ever tell you how I was doing? Claudia shook her head. No. The agreement was that I would have no contact with any of you. Richard sent the checks every month through his lawyer. There was never any communication beyond that. Until, she hesitated. Until what? Sebastian pressed. Until about 6 months before he died. The check suddenly increased from $3,500 to $8,000. No explanation, just bigger deposits. I thought maybe he felt guilty, or maybe he knew he was dying and wanted to make sure I was taken care of after he was gone. Sebastian turned to me. Did you know about that? No, I said honestly. I knew about the original $3,500 because Richard and I agreed on that amount together, but I didn't know he'd increased it. He never told me. He had a heart condition, Damien interjected quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. I found medical records during my investigation. Richard Thornberry was diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy at age 60. His father died of the same condition at 64. The doctors gave Richard maybe 5 years, possibly less. He increased Claudia's payments 6 months before he died, because he knew he didn't have much time left. How do you know all this? Sebastian demanded. Because you hired me to investigate your mother, but I'm thorough, Damien said. I investigated your whole family. I found your father's medical records, his gambling debts, the payments to Claudia, everything. And what I found was a family full of people who loved each other but didn't know how to communicate that love without it being tangled up in secrets and guilt and grief. Sebastian stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need air. I can't sit here anymore. He walked out to the back patio, and after a moment, I followed him. Penelope stayed inside with Harper, understanding without being told that this was something Sebastian needed to work through with me alone. Outside, the November air was cold and clean. Sebastian stood with his hands on the patio railing, looking out at the backyard where he'd played as a child. The swing set was long gone, replaced by mature gardens that I tended myself every weekend. Evidence of time passing, evidence of a childhood that felt both recent and impossibly distant. I used to think there was something wrong with me, Sebastian said, without turning around. When I was a kid, I'd watch you with Ophelia, and you'd be so warm with her, so natural. You'd laugh at her jokes and braid her hair and just be with her in a way you never were with me. And I thought it was my fault. I thought if I just tried harder, got better grades, behaved better, achieved more, you'd finally look at me the way you looked at her. Sebastian, I started, but he held up his hand. Let me finish, please. I need to say this. He took a breath. I've spent my entire adult life trying to be perfect. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect wife, perfect house, perfect child. All of it was about proving to you that I was worth loving, that I was enough. And now I find out that the reason you couldn't love me the way I needed wasn't because I wasn't enough. It was because you were grieving a son I never even knew existed. And I don't know what to do with that information. I don't know whether to be relieved or angry or what. You're allowed to be both, I said quietly. You're allowed to feel everything. Relief that it wasn't your fault. Anger that you suffered anyway. Grief for the brother you never got to meet. Confusion about who Claudia is to you now. All of it is valid. He finally turned to look at me. Did you ever love me? Not in a, I raised you and provided for you way, but in a, this is my son and I would die for him way? The question hung in the cold air between us, and I knew this was the moment everything hinged on. The moment where truth would either heal or destroy us completely. Yes, I said, and I let him see the tears on my face. Not at first. Not in those early years when every time I looked at you, I saw Michael's death and Richard's betrayal. But somewhere along the way, I think it was when you were about 7 years old, you came home from school crying because some kids had been bullying you. And you ran right past Ophelia and right past your father and came straight to me. You threw your arms around my waist and sobbed into my shirt, and I felt this fierce protective surge that I'd never felt before. Someone had hurt my child, and I wanted to destroy them. I moved closer to him. That was the first time I thought of you as mine, not Richard's son that I was raising out of obligation. Mine. And from that moment on, my love for you grew. Slowly, imperfectly, but it grew. By the time you graduated high school, I was so proud I could barely breathe. When you got into Yale, I cried for an hour. When you got married to Penelope, I kept thinking about how lucky she was to get you. And when Harper was born and I watched you hold her for the first time with such tenderness, I thought, I helped raise this man. This good, decent, loving man. And maybe I didn't do it perfectly, but somehow he turned out beautiful anyway. Sebastian's face crumpled, and suddenly he was crying. Really crying, the way he probably hadn't cried since he was a child. I moved forward and pulled him into my arms, and for the first time in maybe 20 years, he let me hold him without any stiffness or reservation. He sobbed into my shoulder the way he had when he was 7 and being bullied. And I held him the way I should have held him 1,000 times before, but was too trapped in my own pain to manage. I'm so sorry, I whispered into his hair. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough. I'm sorry I couldn't break through my own grief to give you what you needed. I'm sorry you spent your life trying to earn something you should have received freely. You deserved a better mother than I was able to be. You were the only mother I had, he said through his tears. You're still the only mother I have. I don't know what Claudia is to me. I don't know if I can have a relationship with her, but you're my mom. You raised me. You're the one who taught me to tie my shoes and drove me to soccer practice and helped me with my college essays. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, I said. And I want you to know something. Michael's death wasn't your beginning. You weren't brought into our family to replace him. You were your own person with your own value. I just couldn't see that clearly enough at the time, but I see it now. And I want to spend whatever time I have left showing you that I see you, really see you, not as Michael's replacement or Richard's mistake or anything else, just as Sebastian, my son, who I love. We stood there for a long time, holding each other and crying, while inside the house our family waited, Ophelia and Penelope and Harper and Claudia and Damien, all of them connected now by truth instead of lies, by honesty instead of secrets. Finally, Sebastian pulled back and wiped his eyes. I want to meet her, Claudia, really meet her, not just yell at her. I want to hear her story. I want to understand why she made the choices she made. Okay, I said. We can do that, tonight or another time if you need space first. Tonight, he said. Let's do it tonight, because I don't want any more waiting. I don't want any more secrets. I just want the truth, all of it, so we can figure out how to move forward. We went back inside together. Everyone looked up as we entered, their faces anxious. Sebastian walked straight to Claudia, who stood up from her chair like she was facing a firing squad. I need to hear it from you, Sebastian said. All of it. Why you gave me up. What you thought about over the last 32 years. What you want from me now. I need the whole truth. Claudia nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll tell you everything. Anything you want to know. And she did. For the next hour, she told him about being young and alone and terrified. About holding him for 2 days in the hospital and memorizing his face. About signing papers that tore her heart in half. About the years of watching from a distance, collecting newspaper clippings, loving him the only way she was allowed to love him. About the regret that never faded and the choice she still didn't know if she'd made right. Sebastian listened to all of it, and Ophelia listened, and Penelope listened, and we all bore witness to Claudia's grief that had been invisible for 3 decades. When she finished, Sebastian was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't know if I can call you Mom. That word belongs to Delphine, even with everything that's happened. But maybe we could figure out what else you could be. Maybe we could start over, with honesty this time. I would like that, Claudia whispered. I would like that more than anything. It wasn't a happy ending. It was too messy and painful and complicated for that. But it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild on a foundation of truth instead of lies. And sometimes, that's the only kind of ending worth having. 3 months have passed since that Sunday dinner that changed everything. 3 months of family therapy sessions, difficult conversations, and slow, painful healing. 3 months of learning how to be honest with each other, even when honesty hurt. The first Thursday after our revelation, I took Sebastian to Michael's grave. We stood there together in the cold, looking at the small headstone with the airplane carved into it, and I told him stories about the brother he never got to meet. I told him about holding Michael in the NICU, about the 3 weeks of hope followed by the devastating loss, about the depression that swallowed me whole afterward. Sebastian cried for a brother he'd never known, and for the mother I'd been unable to be because of that loss. "I'm going to bring Harper here," he said that day. "I want her to know she has an uncle, even if she'll never meet him. I want her to know our family's full story, not just the edited version." And he has. Every few weeks, Sebastian brings Harper to Woodlawn Cemetery, and they leave small toys by Michael's grave, little airplanes mostly, because Harper loves the idea of the mobile I never got to hang. She's too young to understand death, but she understands that Uncle Michael is someone important, someone who's loved even though he's gone. Claudia has become a careful presence in our lives, not a replacement mother. Sebastian was clear about that from the beginning, but something else, something we're still defining. She comes to Sunday dinners now, sitting at the table where she sat that first catastrophic night, and we talk about ordinary things: Harper's latest words, Sebastian's projects at work, Ophelia's architectural designs. We're learning to be something like family, strange and unconventional as it is. Ophelia struggled the most at first. She felt betrayed by the lies, angry that her entire understanding of our family had been false. She stopped calling me for 2 weeks after that dinner, and I thought I might lose her entirely. But then she showed up at my house one evening with a bottle of wine and said, "I need to understand why you thought lying was better than truth. Help me understand, Mom." So I did. We spent hours talking about Michael, about my depression, about the impossible choices that seem so much clearer in hindsight than they did in the moment. Ophelia cried for the brother she'd never known about and for the pain I'd carried silently for decades. "I wish you'd told me," she said. "I wish I'd known why you were the way you were. I spent so much of my childhood feeling guilty that you loved me more than Sebastian, like there was something wrong with me for having what he didn't." "There was nothing wrong with you," I told her. "You were just easier for me to love because you came without all the complicated history. But that wasn't your fault or your burden to carry. That was mine." Sebastian and Claudia's relationship is still tentative, still being negotiated. They meet for coffee every other week, usually without the rest of us, just the two of them figuring out who they are to each other. Claudia doesn't overstep. She doesn't try to claim a role she gave up 32 years ago. But she's there, she's present, and slowly, carefully, Sebastian is letting her in. Last month, Sebastian asked Claudia to come to Harper's 3rd birthday party. Penelope was nervous about it, worried about how to explain to her family who this woman was. But Sebastian was firm. "She's part of our story," he said, "and I'm done hiding parts of our story." So Claudia came, and she brought a gift, a children's book about families that come in all different shapes and configurations. Harper loved it, and Penelope's family was polite if slightly confused. Afterward, I found Claudia standing alone in the kitchen, crying quietly. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing's wrong," she said, wiping her eyes. I got to see my son blow out candles on a birthday cake. For the first time in 33 years, I got to be in the same room while my son celebrated his daughter's birthday. And it's more than I ever thought I'd have." I hugged her then, this woman who'd given birth to my son, and I realized that we were bound together not by competition or resentment, but by our mutual love for Sebastian. We'd both failed him in different ways, and we were both trying to do better. Damien has become an unexpected friend to our family. His daughter Emma is in remission, thriving on the treatment that the money I gave him made possible. He closed his investigation business and started working as a security consultant, choosing his clients based on ethics rather than desperation. He still comes to Sunday dinners sometimes, this stranger who became the catalyst for our family's transformation. "I almost didn't bring you to Claudia's apartment that night," he told me recently. "I almost just drove you home and pretended everything was fine. I'm glad I didn't." "So am I said, and I meant it. The truth has been painful, but it's also been liberating. For the first time in 32 years, I don't have to pretend. I don't have to maintain the fiction of a perfect family with no secrets. I can talk about Michael openly. I can acknowledge my failures as a mother without hiding behind excuses. I can love Sebastian with all my imperfect, complicated feelings without pretending they're simple. Sebastian has changed too. The distance that used to exist between us has slowly diminished. He calls me several times a week now just to talk. He brings Harper over on Thursday afternoons, and we bake cookies together while he tells me about work. Last week, he said something that made me cry. "I'm glad you're my mom. Even with everything that happened, I wouldn't trade you for anyone else. We've started a new tradition. Once a month, all of us go to Woodlawn Cemetery together. Me, Sebastian, Ophelia, Claudia, Penelope, Harper. We stand by Michael's grave and we remember. We remember the son and brother who died too soon. We remember the grief that shaped our family. And we remember that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Last week, Sebastian told me he and Penelope are expecting another baby. A boy. They want to name him Michael Richard, after both the brother Sebastian never met, and the father who made so many mistakes but tried to make things right in the end. Are you sure? I asked, crying. That's a lot of weight for a child to carry. It's not weight, Sebastian said. It's connection. It's acknowledging where we come from, all of us, the good parts and the painful parts. I want my son to know his uncle's name. I want him to know his grandfather's name. And I want him to know that families are complicated and messy and sometimes broken, but they're still worth fighting for. I'm learning to forgive myself. That's been the hardest part. For 34 years, I've carried guilt about Michael's death, about failing Sebastian, about letting grief poison my ability to love freely. But my therapist, yes, I'm finally seeing a therapist, says that self-forgiveness is a process, not a destination. Some days are better than others. On good days, I can look at Sebastian and see him clearly, not as Michael's replacement, not as Richard's mistake, but as himself. A good man who's building his own family, who's learned to love despite being raised by a mother who struggled to show love, who's brave enough to forgive and move forward even when moving forward is terrifying. On bad days, I still go to Michael's grave and apologize. But now, I'm not alone. Now, I have Sebastian and Ophelia with me sometimes, bearing witness to my grief, helping me carry it. Claudia and I talk more now. Sometimes we meet for coffee, just the two of us, and we talk about Sebastian, the child she gave birth to and the man I raised. We compare notes on his quirks, his talents, his struggles. We've discovered we both worried about the same things when he was young, both felt inadequate in our different ways, both loved him more than we knew how to express. Do you think we did the right thing? Claudia asked me last week. Taking Richard's deal? Keeping all the secrets? I thought about it for a long time before answering. I don't know if there was a right thing. We made choices based on who we were at the time, with the information and resources we had. Were they perfect choices? No. But they were human choices, and maybe that's the best any of us can do. This morning, I woke up to a text from Sebastian. Love you, Mom. Thank you for finally telling me the truth. 5 words that meant everything. We're not fixed. We're not magically healed. We're still working through decades of pain and misunderstanding. But we're honest now. We're real with each other. And that's something I never thought we'd have. The house in Greenwich feels different now. It's no longer a museum of carefully maintained appearances. It's messy and loud with Harper's toys scattered across the living room, with Ophelia's architectural drawings spread across the dining table, with Claudia's reading glasses left on the coffee table from last Sunday's dinner. It's full of life, complicated, imperfect, beautiful life. Richard once told me, years before he died, that secrets are like debts. They compound over time until the interest becomes impossible to pay. I didn't understand what he meant then, but I understand now. We paid our debt. We paid it in tears and confrontations and painful truths. We paid it in family therapy sessions and difficult conversations and learning to forgive each other and ourselves. And now, finally, we're free. Not perfect, not undamaged, but free. And free is enough. Free is everything.